Ever since Logitech announced they were ending their very popular Harmony line of remotes, many startups have been popping up all over the place to fill that gap. Sofabaton is one of those companies who thinks that their new X1 Remote is what enthusiasts have been looking for, but is it good enough to be able to pick up the baton? So sorry for that joke. Full transparency, as always, Sofabaton did send me this unit for review, and I also did want to mention that this is a pre-production unit with pre-release software, so just bear that in mind. Let's first take a look at the specs and the design of the X1. So if you are unaware of what a universal remote like the X1 is, it's basically what looks like a standard TV remote, but instead of controlling just one device like your TV, it has the ability to control all of your devices at the same time, giving you one single remote to rule them all. The X1 can control both infrared and Bluetooth remotes and claims support for over 500,000 devices, with the ability to add your own custom remotes not in its database. It's a pretty understated remote with a mostly matte black finish. Now, although it is a plastic construction, it does actually feel really nice in the hand. In my opinion, no creaks or cracks or flexing when you pick it up, and just generally feels pretty good. Up at the top you have a 2-inch display with a scroll wheel for navigating between devices, and then the rest of the buttons are a fairly standard smart remote layout, some of which has certainly, shall we say, taken some design cues from a Fire Stick remote. From the scroll wheel upwards are what is called the global buttons that are for navigating between your different remotes, and everything else below the scroll wheel is for controlling the actual device that you have selected, all of which are remappable. Oh, and the buttons are all backlit for easy viewing in dark scenes. Overall, I do like the design and the layout, with my only complaint, or actually two complaints, being firstly the location of the off and the back buttons up at the top here. Who on earth thought that was a good idea? A much nicer location would have been to actually put them down next to the scroll wheel, so that when you're scrolling around with one hand, they would be much easier to access. Not really a huge deal, but certainly worth mentioning. And then my second complaint is the font on the front of the remote, or on the screen, is just nasty. It's 2021, guys. I don't know how out of all of the fonts out there, this was the one that was chosen to be the nicest, but come on. One thing that is missing also is that there's no physical power button on the remote, but you'll see why this isn't a big deal later. So the way that the X1 works is that it has its own separate hub that plugs in via USB Type-C that the remote communicates with, and the hub is what actually contains the infrared portion. So the infrared isn't actually being sent from the remote itself, but rather from the hub. This does have the benefit that you don't actually need to have the remote pointing at the thing you want to control, so long as the hub is. And it also gives you the advantage of not having Wi-Fi built into the remote itself, which will drastically help to improve the battery life of the remote, which is a pretty massive 60 days. All of the setup is done through the Sofabaton app. Firstly, you'll need to connect the hub to your Wi-Fi by first connecting to the hub directly using Bluetooth, and then entering the Wi-Fi details, which will connect it to your network. Then you can also pair the remote to the hub by pressing the off and back buttons together on the remote until you get a pairing message, and then press and hold the single button on the back of the hub for 1 second, at which point they will pair together. Adding codes to the X1 is a pretty straightforward process. Basically, you search for the brand and model of the device you want to add, and if it's in the list, you can select it, give it a name, and then the codes will automatically be transferred to the hub. Then you can test functionality to see if the codes were correctly imported, and if they were, that's pretty much it. If you now grab the physical remote and using the scroll wheel navigate into devices, you will see that the devices you just added, where you can select it and then use the buttons to control it. One nice thing is that obviously the remote doesn't have quite the same amount of physical buttons that some remotes do. For example, all of the number buttons. So if you select the device once again using the scroll wheel, you'll get access to all of the individual buttons that you can toggle, and you can also remap these to any of the physical buttons on the remote by going into the app. So remember earlier I said I didn't like that there was no physical power button on the remote? Well, I simply take care of this by going into the settings on the app and remapping the red button to be a power button, and this takes care of that problem. And of course you can do this with any of the other buttons that you want. But what about if your device isn't in the supported device list? Well, the X1 does support learning your own remote commands, which is a great function to have. Basically, it works the same way in that you search for the brand and the model that you want, and then you tell it what type of device it is, and then from there it will tell you about all of the stored code bases that they have in their database for that manufacturer, and you can test out these different code bases until you find one that works, and this saves you a hell of a lot of time. However, if none of them work correctly or completely, you can start from scratch and you can learn your own commands. Even if you choose a code base, you may find that one or two buttons still don't work properly, at which point you can replace these individual buttons with your own learned ones. After you put the hub in learning mode, you'll need to put the original remote around 3 inches from the little circle on top of the hub at a 45-ish degree angle, and then press the button. I did find the positioning had to be quite specific, otherwise it wouldn't see it, so that was a little annoying, but once you find it, it is a fairly straightforward process, if not a little tedious. Anytime you add a new device to the X1, pretty much as soon as you've had time to pick up the remote, it will have already synced with the hub and is good to go, controlling your devices straight away, which is really nice. One other nice functionality of the remote is that there is a Find My Remote feature that, when toggled inside the app, will actually let out a little noise from the built-in speaker on the remote so that you can find it easily. One other thing the X1 can do is called activities, which is essentially adding a whole sequence of button presses from one or even multiple devices into a single quick press button, which can be replayed at any time. For example, if you have like a TV or a separate speaker that you want to turn on, set the sound level, then maybe turn on your Xbox and load up the last game you were playing, then you can do that and save it all as a single button on the remote. Neat. One thing I was really missing here is some sort of API to work with, which could potentially allow easier learning and sharing of codes, but would also allow the X1 to work with other services like Home Assistant, which would be a real game changer for this remote. I see absolutely no reason why they can't add this, so it's a shame it's not possible to do this, at least not yet. Let's talk a little bit about price and where we need to have a little talk about Sofabaton as a whole. So the X1 is currently being funded on Kickstarter, and as of the time you are watching this, the campaign will be just about to end or already ended and is insanely over its original goal, which is nice. Now the price as it stands for all of this, as you see here, is currently £75 or $99, which, when you consider that some universal remotes are upwards of £300, that does really start to sound like a pretty good deal. Now, I have no idea what the pricing will be like after the campaign ends, and again, I'm not recommending that you buy this from Kickstarter. However, this is Sofabaton's second product. The X1 is actually a successor to the original U1 remote, which now sells on Amazon. So they do have a track record of successfully delivering a product to market. But I am assuming it's going to stay roughly around that original price. And at that original price, I think it certainly starts to make it a compelling option. Sofabaton's biggest challenge, I feel, is just around the software. Mostly it works well, but there are a couple of quirks. For example, the search function for remotes is horrible. If I type CX802 as my model into the search box, it doesn't find anything, but if I then add 50 to the start of that, which is the screen size, then it returns a result, which makes absolutely no sense. What about all the other screen sizes that were available for this TV? Also, other things like trying to search for Xbox. Do I choose just Xbox? Microsoft Xbox? Which one is it? There were also other weird random spelling errors which just don't inspire confidence. Now yes, this is pre-production software, but there are other things about Sofabaton that just don't give me confidence in their brand. Like when I go to their website and their business email address is an Outlook email, or when I search through the supported devices on their website and I get weird messages like this. But other than the search issue, those things don't actually affect the working of the device, and I think the product that they have here is good. The hardware is certainly good. I do like the feel of the remote in the hand, and it generally works well. Latency when pressing buttons down wasn't too bad at all, and generally it's pretty responsive. 60 days of battery life is a real bonus too. All in all, this is probably one of the cheapest ways to get into the universal remote space, as long as you don't mind putting up with some software quirks. But what are your guys' thoughts on the new X1 from Sofabaton? I do have to admit, I'm not really the biggest user of remotes. I don't really have any devices that have remotes anymore, but clearly there is a huge market for these, so I'm really interested to hear what you guys think in the comments down below. Other than that, I do hope you enjoyed this video. Please make sure to drop it a like and get subscribed, and if you want to support the channel, then you could do so by becoming a patron on Patreon, and your support allows me to keep on making these videos. Thank you to all my current Patreon supporters. As always, your support is very much appreciated. Make sure to drop this video a like and get subscribed. I know I said that, and I will see you in the next video.